Hi folks, Ben Schatzel here from Stanham Core. Today we're going to try a slightly different type of video for this channel, and what I'd like to do today is explain some basic behavioral concepts, starting with types of contingencies. Now, we really have four primary types of contingencies, and within those are two specific categories. You may have heard about some of these terms before. We're going to be talking about reinforcement and punishment. But really the idea here is to focus in on what do these terms actually mean. A lot of times we see them misused out in society or in general public. And so we want to specify these terms a little bit, as well as provide some real world examples. Starting with reinforcement. Now, reinforcement is a contingency which will always increase the frequency of a behavior. So if you go and you purchase a candy bar from 7-Eleven and you receive that candy bar and it is reinforcing to you, then you will more frequently go and purchase a candy bar. That behavior has been reinforced over time. That would be an example of positive reinforcement. Now, we actually have two different types of reinforcement. Positive reinforcement is the first one, and we also have negative reinforcement. Now, again, both of these types of reinforcements will increase the frequency of the behavior. On the opposite side, we have punishment, and as you might be able to guess, we have two different types of punishment: positive punishment and negative punishment. Now, unlike reinforcement, punishment will always serve to decrease a behavior over time. And so it's important to think objectively here, because even though something might feel reinforcing or it might feel punishing, the only way that we can really determine whether or not that behavior has been reinforced or punished is to look at its frequency over time. If that frequency goes up, it's been reinforced, and if that frequency goes down, then it's been punished. So let's kick things off here with positive reinforcement. This is probably the most commonplace, while also one of the most misunderstood behavioral concepts. So what does positive reinforcement do? Well, it increases the behavior. As we said, it's a form of reinforcement, and so it will always increase that behavior. But it does so by adding a stimulus of some kind. So when we say positive reinforcement, we're not thinking about the word positive as it means good or moral or beneficial. We're thinking about it more like mathematics, like plus or minus. Positive would be a plus. So we are adding a stimulus here, and as a result, that behavior is increasing. Remember our candy bar? We're adding the candy bar to the customer's life, and as a result, we're increasing that behavior of going to the store and buying a candy bar. Now, what is it not? Well, it's not always something good, right? Or it's not necessarily always a prize. If you have an itch and you scratch that itch, then you feel a sense of relief, and that will positively reinforce you to do the same thing in the future. So it's relatively neutral in that regard. Likewise, it might even be something bad. For example, if a kid is misbehaving in class and they're yelled at by the teacher, but their behavior continues to increase and they continue to misbehave in class, then that yelling stimulus from the teacher is actually serving a positively reinforcing effect on that child's behavior. It's not necessarily a good thing, but the outcome is positive reinforcement. And it's not the same for everybody. What's positively reinforcing for me may not necessarily be positively reinforcing for you or for somebody else. And these reinforcers might change over time. And so what's positively reinforcing for me in this moment of my life may not be the same in the future or the same as it was in the past. Now, how about negative reinforcement? Again, this is something that is typically misunderstood. So let's take a look. What does it do? Well, again, remember, negative reinforcement is a form of reinforcement. And so that behavior will increase over time. But the negative component, again, think about mathematics. We are removing a stimulus. So the behavior goes up, but the reason it goes up is because we're removing something that makes that behavior happen again more frequently. And I'll provide an example in just a moment. What is it not? Well, it's not punishment. Negative reinforcement will always make the behavior increase. Negative reinforcement will not make the behavior decrease. That's a different thing. That's punishment, right? And negative reinforcement is not any less effective than positive reinforcement. Both can be equally as effective. They just might be used in different ways. Now here's an example of negative reinforcement. I want you to think about the seatbelt buzzer in your car. When you don't clip the seatbelt, then that annoying buzzer comes on. Once you clip the seatbelt, then it's taken away. The annoying buzzing sound and its removal is negatively reinforcing the behavior of clipping the seatbelt. Now, it's not adding a stimulus, it's not providing silence, it's taking away a stimulus that we don't enjoy. Now again, somebody might enjoy that sound, in which case they won't be negatively reinforced to clip the seatbelt. They might be positively reinforced to do exactly what they're doing. But car companies are smart and they're pretty good at making that buzzing sound as annoying as humanly possible. Moving on. So let's take a look at the other side of things. Positive punishment. Now, what does it do? Well, as a form of punishment, it will decrease the frequency of the behavior, but it does so by adding a stimulus. So positive punishment is oftentimes what we think about when we think about children being spanked or disciplined somehow. But there's also other forms of positive punishment. We'll take a look in just a second. What is it not? Well, it's not necessarily something bad all the time. It could be neutral or it could be good. And it's also not as effective as reinforcement. Now let's take a look at an example. If a child runs into the street and their parent yells at them to stop, and that child stops, then they are being punished for running out into the street. That behavior has stopped or decreased because they received the positive stimulus of being yelled at, but that's not necessarily something bad, right? That could be good parenting. You don't want your kid to get hit by a car or for anything dangerous to happen, and so it's all about keeping the child safe. It's not necessarily a bad thing morally, but it is a form of positive punishment because it is reducing that behavior of eloping or running away. Now, why is it not as effective as reinforcement? Because punishment needs to specify a behavior, and that's something that is just much more difficult to do through punishment than through reinforcement. Now, if a parent tells a child to stop while they're running out into the street, then they might fully stop. But they don't necessarily know if they are being yelled at because they're running into the street. They don't know if they're being told to stop because they're dribbling a basketball or any other things. Whereas with reinforcement, in the way that it's received by the individual, there's more specificity. So again, think about scratching the itch. If you scratch the itch on your arm and it goes away, then you immediately know that the reason that it went away was because you scratched that itch and you felt a sense of relief. Likewise, when you buy or at the candy bar, you specifically know that the reason you received that candy bar is because you provided money to the clerk. And so those contingencies are able to take root in the behavioral patterns of the individual with greater specificity. Now for negative punishment. So what does this do? You might be able to say it for me now, but negative punishment will decrease the behavioral frequency, and it does so by removing a stimulus. What is it not? It is not morally negative. Again, we're thinking about this in terms of mathematics. We are removing a stimulus, and as a result, that behavioral frequency is declining. Now, the thing about negative punishment is it is also not independently punishing. Let me explain. Perhaps the best example of negative punishment is timeout. If you take a child and sit them in timeout after they are misbehaving, then they are being negatively punished for their behavior. They are being removed from a positive stimulus of play and enjoyment with their friends, and as a result, we are hoping that their behavior will decrease, whatever behavior it is that we took them into timeout for. But the problem is that on its own is not enough to change the frequency of the behavior. Why not? Because in order for the timeout to be effective, time in must be highly reinforcing. And so the only way that sitting a child into timeout will be effective is if they are really enjoying playing with their friends, interacting with toys, or socializing. And as a result, if they are removed from that, then ideally the behavior that triggered that contingency will decrease over time. What often happens, however, is perhaps that child is not enjoying time in. Maybe they don't want to play with their friends, they don't like somebody else on the playground, or they're in a bad mood and they just don't want to play and be outgoing. Well then, in that case, a child might intentionally try to get themselves into timeout, because for them, timeout might be even more reinforcing than being in time in. Especially if they're receiving attention from an adult, or they're in a quieter area, or if it's just a different atmosphere that they're more interested in, then what's going to happen is that behavior will increase. And so negative punishment requires for there to be a positive stimulus in the first place that we are able to remove. So as we review, we have two primary types of contingencies: reinforcement, which will increase the behavior, punishment, which will decrease the behavior. And then we have positive and negative. Positive, which will introduce a new stimulus, and negative, which will withdraw a positive stimulus. All right. So as we review, here's a quick chart for you to look at. We have positive reinforcement and negative reinforcement. Again, that behavior will increase over time, and that is either through the addition or subtraction of a stimulus. Positive and negative punishment will decrease that behavior over time through the addition or subtraction of a stimulus. Now that's all for today. If you enjoyed this video, I highly recommend that you check out one of our others. We recently did a video on culture and how different types of culture inform us as to behavioral patterns as it pertains to the workplace. I recommend you check that out. I'll link it below. And until next time, my name's Ben Schatzel. You've been watching Spectrum Network. Take care.